which for me is a question I mean, I hope this doesn't sound not self-indulgent, but indulgent. Conversations about freedom of speech, you know, hearing or reading articles about journalists who've got, you know, national radio shows or columns in national newspapers complaining about their freedom of speech. I love that. I mean, in normal circumstances, it's hilarious. They're compromising my freedom of speech. Read all about it on page 3, 7, 9, 14, 15 and 20. Oh, and by the way, I'll be on Question Time tonight also complaining about all the attacks on my freedom of speech. I mean, it is objectively hilarious, but only from the outside. If you're inside complaining about attacks upon your freedom of speech in your national newspaper column, then presumably you can't see how funny it is to the rest of us. And you know, there are followers, there are camp followers, by which I mean followers of the camp, not sort of Larry Grayson tribute acts. There are camp followers who also complain about their freedom of speech being attacked on social media, often with hundreds of thousands of followers. And it's a horrible story today, not the Desmond Swayne story. I again, as I suggested to you yesterday, I don't think that's a phone-in topic. I think he's behaved abominably, but giving oxygen to the people who share views regarding the NHS lying about figures or fixing the statistics, which is the phrase that he used, claiming that it's difficult to reconcile ICU figures with claims that there's a deathly pandemic out there. I think we have to report these stories, but you understand why I can't let you on the radio to say stuff that could kill someone, don't you? Am I denying your freedom of speech by doing that? That's the question that we're going to start with today, because there is an absolutely awful story. You've probably seen it, involving a gentleman called Gary Matthews. I think the only time I felt my temper fraying this week was when we took a call from, I think it was Hampstead, from a fellow who was punting that libertarian Tufton Street think tank line about if things go wrong, it's personal responsibility, and you sort of found yourself thinking, well, look, if you've got really prominent people claiming that the moon is made of cheese and getting paid a ton of money to claim that the moon is made of cheese, surely they've got more responsibility for ordinary people who are too busy getting on with their lives to do the research or the digging that they need to do. If they end up believing that the moon is made of cheese, surely the blame lies with the people that told them, doesn't it? It's a defence mechanism here. I talked about it with Rachel Clark, the doctor, who's the guest on this week's Full Disclosure. There's a defence mechanism there when it comes to, sometimes you believe things that are pretty mean and callous from the outside because they make you feel safer on the inside. So if you get attacked, and I think this is why women sometimes join in with the old High Court judge lines about short skirts and sexual assaults. So women can reassure themselves that it won't happen to them because they wouldn't go out dressed like that. It's nonsense, disgusting and wrong, but it's got a veneer of logic to it. So this dreadful story involving a chap called Gary Matthews, who is very, very sadly no longer with us, has really got under my skin because he appears from newspaper reports and some, I haven't confirmed, but tweets that are allegedly from his social media accounts. He didn't wear a mask or adhere to any safety measures for weeks, well, throughout. He continued to meet with friends after falling for, you see, the Evening Standard says wild COVID conspiracy theories online, but I don't think that's fair. I think some of these wild COVID conspiracy theories are emerging from what we refer to as mainstream media. He was a painter, a very talented painter, and by all accounts a lovely bloke. His cousin talks about him very warmly, and obviously very, very sadly. His Twitter profile does show that he was regularly sharing anti-lockdown messages. He was calling Chris Whitty Dr. Death for suggesting tougher rules over Christmas. You'll remember yesterday we touched upon a story of 4 members of the same family who spent Christmas together had died, and his retweets include very prominent public figures, including one who used to work here, 2 actually, I think, who used to work here, who have done things like cut up face masks on live streams. There's someone called Dave. Good grief. Do you remember I said to you that I'd read a tweet that said, show your face, meet your friends, hug other people, go where you want, disobey tyrants, #FightBackBetter. I said this on air, and I didn't tell you who'd posted it. I said, it's such desperate attention seeking. It was a member of the London Assembly. And I read you the tweet, and I thought, I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of saying his name on the radio. Well, I think I have to today. He is a Brexit Alliance London Assembly member. His name is David Curtin. And one of the posts that Gary liked in the weeks before his death stated, show your face, meet your friends, hug other people, go where you want, disobey tyrants, #FightBackBetter. And now he's dead. This is a question I don't know the answer to. I have an opinion, but I don't have any factual or definitive response to this. Is Gary's death the price we all pay for the freedom of speech of public figures who he appeared to have been persuaded by? Is that it? And you can't shut down these people. You can laugh at them when they write their columns about, their national newspaper columns about how their freedom of speech has been compromised. But you can't ban them. I don't think you can. And I suppose that personal responsibility argument becomes a way of avoiding responsibility or absolving people who, for my money, and I'll say this out loud, and if you persuade me I shouldn't have done, I'll withdraw it later this hour, but this man was radicalised by household name journalists and politicians, and that radicalisation has contributed to killing him. Is that the price we pay for so-called freedom of speech? Okay, so the introduction proper would be this. I'm disgusted by some of the stuff that has been published and broadcast by major news or major media outlets, major media platforms. I don't like journalists attacking journalists. I think that's both unhelpful in many ways and self-indulgent. I think it's like a domestic, and but even the people next door don't care. They might get irritated by the noise. It's also, of course, an appalling catalyst for tribalism. I'm closer today, however, than I've ever been from just making a kind of collection of names that appear in this particular story. I've mentioned David Curtin because he's an elected politician, but I don't know. You don't need to hear about my personal internal wrestlings. But the fact is this: a man who is a COVID denier. His family say they begged him to wear a face mask before he died alone in his flat from the virus. He had been ill for a week. He tested positive the day before he died. According to his family, he did not wear a mask or adhere to safety measures. And according to his own family, he continued to meet with friends after falling for wild COVID conspiracy theories. Again, the report here says online, but then it goes on to name people who, well, I suppose, who do the bulk of their work offline, as it were, on mainstream media. But of course, it all gets broadcast and amplified on social media, and you know that means there's I would say quite a strong possibility that he was walking around being highly infectious and continuing to meet up with like-minded friends, and also to potentially infect people that he'd never met before, to breathe on people that he'd never met before. Now, the masks are a good example because, as I've said to you a million times, just do the better safe than sorry. The masks were always described to us as something that were more about protecting others than they were about protecting yourself. And he didn't wear one because he'd been persuaded that it was unnecessary or dodgy, and now he's dead. But even more importantly, perhaps, because I can see the case for arguing that he's a victim of his own ignorance. I don't agree with that, but I can see the case. How many people may he have infected by being so willfully irresponsible? And how come the people that persuaded him to be so willfully irresponsible get to waltz away over the sunset absolutely unchecked and unchallenged? I really like this question. I think it's a very important question. Is this how it has to be? Because I think, at first glance, I think it is probably how things have to be. I don't see how else you can do it. You have to let these people do crazy things in public, even if it means that poor souls like Gary die. I'd love to be wrong. At the moment, I can't see that I am. nothing new there. 26 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 60973. I'm not going to name the names because, well, I've explained why. It's not a hill I'm going to die on, but it's just my personal view, my personal attitude to things. He believed all the people whose names you already know that rail against masks. One of the tweets he put used the words muzzle. Remember when you told me people were calling them face nappies and I didn't believe you, and then I went and checked. I just Googled the phrase face nappies. Couldn't believe some of the names that came up. And I think I can't see a system under which they can be prevented from doing what they've done. And I can't see an account of Gary's death that doesn't apportion at least some of the responsibility to them. Luke's in Stoke-on-Trent. Luke, what do you think?
James, basically that if we're going to start accepting this as the baseline of how we move forward, then we've got to reevaluate how we treat terrorists and hate preachers. Quite simply, because if you want to...
I think we've got... I'll let you make your point, but just as an early caution, I think I've got enough on my plate without bringing terrorists and hate preachers into it.
But like you say, what I'm saying is that if you want to take it that this guy's been radicalised to have those views and opinions, then you have to then look at people like the 9/11 bombers.
No, I don't think you do you? You mean as in they believed the preachers and therefore... No, because Gary didn't deliberately go out and try to kill anybody. If he has been responsible... No, it's not the same. It's completely different. Because if I say to you, Luke, go out and kill someone... That's very different from saying to you, Luke, don't wear one of these masks, and then you, in good faith, not wearing one, and much against your own desires and your own understanding of the issue, accidentally infecting someone.
I'd say where I'm coming from is that a lot of this brainwashing is going on in the public sphere, and whether or not it's like you say, tacit or...
Oh, okay. No, you're making a better point than I gave you credit for. I apologise.
Yeah. The thing is that we're at the thin end of a wedge now of people being told what they should and shouldn't do, then taking action and causing...
okay, so the word we need for me to have understood your point a little quicker would be radicalisation.
Yes.
Gary Matthews was radicalised. And, you know, the question that people always ask when it is, as you suggest, Islamist fundamentalists or even extremists who aren't white supremacists, the question that is always asked is who radicalised him? So if we say who radicalised Gary Matthews, we kind of know, don't we?
Yeah.
And if we were to say that they... Well, okay, so they don't get punished. The people who radicalised Gary Matthews don't get punished, but the people who radicalised... terrorists do get punished.
Held accountable.
Well, they are, though.
Well, I mean, like you say, are the people who were saying that wearing a mask, a face nappy, is really being called out in the public square and said, look, you're not only just harming people's lives, you're causing people to get completely insane in doing things that...
So freedom of speech, so no one told him to go out and... Also, you know, if I was a lawyer, I'd point out my client has, maybe apart from the fellow who actually cut one up on Facebook, but my client has merely expressed scepticism about some of the published science. At no point did he encourage people like Gary Matthews to go out and endanger themselves and others. Yeah, so it's, mate, sorry, I didn't bite your head off, thankfully, but I did, I don't know, you said the words terrorists and I had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, and given how much time I spend castigating others for having a knee-jerk reaction, I shall take my medicine on that. But is this the price we pay? Luke's added even further nuance to the story. This man is dead because he believed people who are very prominent in the public space, casting doubt on things like face masks and on the COVID figures and indeed the virus in general, casting doubt on social distancing, on lockdowns. Is that the price we pay for freedom of speech? People like Gary will die. It's one of the most misunderstood and probably misused phrases of the age, isn't it, free speech? It probably always has been. The great Rosetta Stone to unlock its complexities is famously the person shouting fire in a crowded cinema when there isn't one. Is he exercising freedom of speech, or is he actually culpable for death when the stampeding cinema goers head for a small fire exit and end up trampling over each other to get there. And, you know, that's not a rhetorical question. Of course he's guilty, and that is not freedom of speech. So whether it is suggesting that lockdowns don't work, which you still hear coming from the most unlikely and surprising of places, highest death toll in the world, but lockdowns don't work. Right. Figures coming down as a result of every lockdown we've had, figures going back up again as a result of coming out of them too early. But yeah, they don't work. I mean, that's incredible. But it's by far, it's nowhere near the worst example of so-called COVID denial or skepticism. Don't wear a mask. Huh? And ignore the social distancing rules, carry on meeting your friends. And then this character, who, I won't lie to you, who I wish I'd never heard of, but who sits, I mean, imagine if you voted for him. He sits in the London Assembly as a member of something called the Brexit Alliance, and he has tweeted, and I read you the tweet, and I said at the time, I'm not going to give him any more attention. And on days like today, I wonder what if Gary Matthews had been listening that day, and I had taken a few minutes to pull this David Curtin character to pieces, and maybe Gary Matthews would be alive today. But one of the last things this chap did in the weeks before his death was to like a post from this politician that says, show your face, meet your friends, hug other people, go where you want, disobey tyrants. So he did. And you can argue that he's dead as a result of his own ignorance, but if he was doing that while infected, how many other people? So where does freedom of speech end in this context? There's no definitive answer, but as ever on this programme, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Macaulay is in Manchester. Macaulay, what would you like to say?
Hiya, James. Big fan of the show, just like to say.
You're
big fan of you.
You're very kind, Macaulay. A man of impeccable taste. You carry on like this and I'll be reading out what the Times Literary Supplement have just said about me. But for the moment, modesty prevails, Macaulay. Go on, what point did you want to make?
So I've got a friend on Facebook, and I could slowly see that descent into the rabbit hole.
Really?
At first it was, this COVID stuff, it's a bit weird, isn't it? Out of nowhere, and posts that have sort of followed that trend at first. Then they started getting a bit more extreme, saying that it's all a big part of the New World Order, that it's a big plan. Then she starts sharing pictures and videos of family meals, no face masks, no social distancing, no nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'd had a lot of arguments on Facebook, and I was saying you're being very irresponsible here.
And what would she say in return?
Oh, all sorts of.
You're part of the problem. You're. I mean,
Exactly.
You're a sheeple. You've fallen for it.
I was a sheeple.
Wake up.
I needed to wake up.
Yeah.
But then she went quiet for a couple of weeks, and I thought she must have unfriended me because we'd had these arguments.
Yeah.
Anyway, I checked. We were still friends. She had just gone quiet. A couple of days later, very, very, very sadly, posted an update that her dad had died from COVID.
Oh, my Lord.
And
has there been any self-examination?
Like
I can tell you're not someone that would derive any sort of schadenfreude from that by any stretch of the imagination. But
and I was absolutely devastated for her. But, you know, she's got a family, husband, kids, you know, all that sort of stuff. And I just think how terrifying it must be to actually buy into that conspiracy. Like, believe the Earth is flat if you want. That doesn't hurt anyone. Believe certain conspiracies that don't do any harm. This conspiracy does cause real-world, tangible harm to people.
Yeah, and yet, how would we police it? I mean, not least because, for want of a better phrase, it's a moving target, isn't it? It's you know, the science is relatively new. The World Health Organization was unpersuaded of the wisdom of masks at the very, very outset. We didn't understand it well enough to make definitive statements. So the most successful conspiracy theories are the ones that contain the tiniest nugget of truth. And from that tiny nugget, all manner of madness and nonsense can spread. Do you know if your friend has had a sort of moment of self-examination, or presumably she might be too bamboozled by grief, but does she recognise you haven't? Okay, I was going to say, does she recognise that you were right? And goodness knows what you'd say when you do.
She hasn't been sharing anti-social distancing or anti-mask stuff since. I've not spoken to her in person, but I know the manager of a chain store, hardware chain store.
Yeah.
And she was saying on the phone that she just gets abuse day in, day out. You'll have 7 people in the store, and you'll say, "No, it's six tops,"
yes.
and then someone kicks off, and you've got to wear your mask, and someone else kicks off.
I wonder whether we've underreported this kind of thing for whatever reason, not we specifically. But that mindset is a weird one. The cousin of Gary Matthews, a chap called Tristan Copeland, said he'd begged him to wear a mask and to maintain social distance. And this bit is in quotes, and it chimes completely with what you've just said. He and his friends had the mindset that they needed to go out and meet people to show they didn't believe the government.
It's madness. I mean, it's hard. Like, I haven't seen my mum in over a year. I haven't seen my grandmother in over a year.
Gosh.
But I'd be devastated. I couldn't live with myself if I broke social distancing guidelines. I went round to the house and I gave them COVID. I couldn't live with myself.
No, but that's because you believe that you might. You know that you might, I think, is a fair comment, whereas they believe that they won't, which... we need a lawyer on the line. I'm sure there are a couple listening who would wade into this on 03456060973. But if I honestly didn't believe I was putting you at risk by coming round to yours for tea, even though I was, then I wonder whether the finger of culpability moves from the agent of infection to the person who persuaded the agent of infection that they weren't infectious.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh, Macaulay, what a terrible tale. And I'm grateful to you for sharing it, because it highlights that all of this, it's a public conversation, but it speaks immediately to the personal. And I think it was probably a little bit over the top of me to wonder whether if I'd had a crack at this so-called Brexit alliance politician on air instead of just reading out the tweet and then dismissing it, wondering whether if people had been listening to that who'd fallen for this, it may have helped just drag one back from the precipice. And it's that line there, I think. Every time I read this article from last night's Standard, I find myself focusing on a different line. But it's that one there. He and his friends had the mindset that they needed to go out and meet people to show they didn't believe the government. Many public figures, names that are currently jostling for prominence in your own mind, have created that belief. Is that the price of free speech? The fact that next time this happens, God forbid in our lifetimes, they'll still be there, insisting that they know better, finding perhaps one vaguely qualified scientist to challenge the consensus of every supremely qualified scientist in the relevant field, and then sticking him on their radio show every 10 minutes. Is that how it, I mean, is that just the price we pay? I don't know what motivates these people, but I don't know what might stop them either. Jan is in Traben in Germany. Jan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thank you very much for taking my call. I'm a bit nervous, I must say.
Oh, it's only me. Don't worry.
All right. So I'm not a lawyer, but I do think I have a pretty good idea what's behind all of these conspiracy theories. All of those lies being spouted by figureheads in the newspapers that's owned by billionaires. Yes, that's all tragic, but I think there's a much, much greater problem, and I think it's actually worldwide. And that is the echo chambers of social media.
Yes. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive conclusions, but while you're here, do you have household name actors, journalists, politicians in Germany who are publicly and lucratively, in terms of either money or attention, telling people not to wear masks, being sceptical, poo-pooing lockdown? I mean, is it an industry in Germany like it is here? Because I just don't know. I
don't believe so. I've never seen any public figure or politician spouting about that. And also
Really?
The country where I'm from, the Netherlands, also there's. Well, the handling of it was pretty bad. And
there's massive protests, and the line between a valid protest against government incompetence and a protest in favour of conspiracies and lies is very thin. It's vanishingly thin, because two people from both camps can turn up at the same protest, and how can you then conclude what the protest is about? But that strengthens your point, because I'm sitting here thinking that the radicalisers, the preachers of anti-mask, anti-lockdown scepticism are accountable, and you're sort of saying, look, even if they weren't there, this problem would probably be just as big because of the social media echo chambers.
Exactly my point.
Oh, well, we'll never know.
And there are people that are saying, for instance, your namesake on Wednesday, A. James, he said there's this question of personal responsibility,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Well, I have a pretty good retort, I think.
Go on.
Well, what if you are not easily influenced?
Yeah.
Right. That's just not possible, because all these big companies are spending billions and billions and billions in advertising.
Yes.
If advertising does not work, why are they spending billions?
Well, this is your absolute. This is kryptonite to the Tufton Street personal responsibility view. It's all free choice. It's all personal responsibility, which would be true if they spent as much money on encouraging people not to eat junk food and guzzle sugary drinks as they do on encouraging people to do it. So, I think you might enjoy my first book, Jan. I don't know that it's been translated into any of the native languages you have, but your English is well good enough to enjoy it. 10:46 is the time. 03456060973 is the number. It's funny, isn't it? I don't know that there is a way through this, Woods. You can't. What would happen? Some people were cross when Donald Trump was taken off Twitter after encouraging his followers to launch an attack upon the Capitol. Successfully encouraging them to launch an attack upon the Capitol. Lying through his teeth. The most powerful man on the planet, lying several times a day about the results of a democratic election. And some people felt that his freedoms were somehow being compromised when Twitter far too belatedly, took him off their platform. So are we in a world where freedom of speech means freedom to be fatally wrong? And if you don't like it, then someone will bowl up to explain why it's all your own fault you're dead. You've got 100 people queuing up to say, drink this poison, drink this poison, drink this poison, drink this poison, drink this poison. You've got your algorithms set up and your media choices made in such a way you don't hear any of the voices saying, I'm a poison expert, please don't drink this. I'm a poison. All you hear is drink this poison, drink this poison, drink this poison, drink this poison. You turn on your radio, drink this poison. Open your newspaper, drink this poison. Go on Facebook, drink this poison. Go on Twitter, drink this poison. And then you drink the poison, and some vampire with a newspaper column will come along and explain why it's all your own fault and you should have used your personal responsibility. Reasons why I might be wrong when I prefer to focus on politicians or elected politicians rather than journalists, and I steer a little bit clear of blaming social media completely for lies and conspiracy theories that have taken hold in the country on a scale that I think many people just don't realise. It's probably one of those subjects about which you know next to nothing or everything. If you know someone, or if you are someone who's gone down these rabbit holes, you're an expert. The rest of us are complete ingenues. We know almost nothing. But the thing that makes me wonder whether I'm wrong is actually an American politician called Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until relatively recently would have been one of the online loonies, alleging that school shooting tragedies in Newton and in Parkland were staged, claiming that Hillary Clinton had murdered a child during a satanic ritual and drunk her blood. I think that there was a line about a Jewish laser being used to... I'll double check that. I wouldn't want to misrepresent her in any way, shape or form. But, she is... Also, she was filmed following a very impressive young man called David Hogg, who was at the school in Parkland, where 20 of his classmates were murdered, and who then had to endure a hate campaign. One of the fathers, or at least one of the fathers involved in that, has had to go into hiding, appears on television in disguise because he gets attacked by followers of one of Donald Trump's most prominent supporters who was arguing before and after Donald Trump became president that the Parkland school shootings were a hoax. And this woman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is now a congresswoman for the state of Georgia. So, that suggests that focusing on elected politicians instead of the people punting it in the public space is dangerous, because the people punting it in the public space tomorrow could be elected politicians. People punting it in the public space yesterday could be elected politicians tomorrow. 10:54 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we find ourselves just wondering where the line is between freedom of speech and radicalising so-called COVID deniers who are now dead. Richard is in Toaster. Richard, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Great admirer, first-time caller.
Thank you. People don't have to say that. I'm always very flattering when they do, but I wouldn't want anyone to think it was a requirement of entry. Carry on, Richard.
Yeah, we run 3 groups on Facebook, conspiracy groups, where we actually get the conspiracy theorists in and then try to educate them with facts.
Gosh.
So
how do you mind if I don't want you to give away trade secrets, but how do you lure them in?
We lure them in under the guise of a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, wow.
So the likes of David Icke, Gareth Icke,
right.
Brian Rose. But
Yes.
picking up on your point about politicians, I find it ironic that someone like Brian Rose is allowed to run for mayor of London.
I don't know who he is.
Well, he's running for mayor of London.
Okay.
And yet he's given a platform to all the conspiracy theorists in America and this country during the pandemic.
Well, so have media outlets that we have all heard of. So I'm not. The only reason I'm reluctant is because you know more about this than I do, and I'm not. Yeah. I don't have the facts at my fingertips in order to say, whoa, we're just veering a bit close to that line, or we're veering a bit close to that line. So if we could, and I'm staying with this until 12, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to expand. But I'm more interested in what you do to help these people and how you feel about. You've mentioned names, and that's fine. If he wants to get elected, he's a politician. He's thrown his hat into the public ring. But how could we possibly make a case for their complicity in the deaths of people like Gary Matthews? Not the people you've named, but the people doing similar things.
You've got to look at social media as a whole.
Is it?
And look at all media outlets to do with Facebook, what they've been allowed to be shown. They do have the fact check system in place. But even the fact check systems, they're partially false, partially rated false. We then take people out of the groups into direct messaging.
Oh, really?
And then we show them proper information. To give you an example, I've been sent a video of Bill Gates, for example, speaking at a video conference which had been cleverly audited to make it sound genuine. And then I had to find the real piece to send back to the person I was dealing with.
What's your hit rate, would you say?
We have a hit rate of about 3%.
So for every 100 people you contact, 3 you manage to bring back to the light?
Yeah, and the rabbit hole is very deep, James.
I know.
Even if we can get them up to the rim, it's a success, But
why do you do it?
I'm a 4th-year psychology student. Yeah. I'm currently a builder. I'm coming away from that trade. And I'm compassionate about my fellow humans. Very compassionate.
And you are, I'm not to put too fine a point on it, and the case again, you could be saving lives. You could be saving lives.
We have an admin team as well that are all very compassionate. They all work.
Really?
Some are nurses, some are doctors.
I think that's the definition of heroism, to have a 3% hit rate on such profoundly important work, because most of us would probably give up and go home at that point, and yet here you are fighting the good fight.
It is challenging, James, but someone has to do the work, We can all be critical of society. The buck has to land somewhere. I do think that the government should do more to do with the misinformation.
Well, how can it if you've got people like Desmond Swayne? Not in the government, technically, but in the party of government and in Parliament.
They should pull him in line, James. That's what they should do. And I think the biggest problem now that we're going to face is vaccine misinformation.
Well, the MP, this is Desmond Swayne, gave an interview 2 weeks ago to Del Bigtree. Is that a name you know?
Yeah.
A producer for Andrew Wakefield's anti-vaccine propaganda operation. So Desmond claimed that Britain had become a, quotes, police state, end quotes, and accused the government of attempting to implement, quotes, social control, end quotes, and this particular anti-vaxxer called the MP a hero. So legally, I don't think you can touch him.
Legally you can't, but the government needs to. If you look at society and think that, just say 1% of society is down the rabbit hole right now.
Yeah. More than that,
then he falls into that 1%, James.
And I think I think you're the guiding light for the rest of us then this hour, because of the work you do and the knowledge that you have, is that you have to accept this is the price we pay for freedom of speech, and you fight it by exercising your own freedom of speech.
It's a full-time job after a full-time job, James.
How can people find out more about what you do? And bearing in mind that this is the first I've heard of it, and I have absolutely no reason not to take you completely in good faith. But obviously I can't endorse anything that I don't know about.
All I can say, James, is there's going to be a television programme coming up soon, which is basically going to give our groups a lot of limelight.
Oh, I look forward to that. Tell the producer more about it so that I can make sure that I direct traffic in your direction. But finally, Richard, if someone listening to this were desperate to benefit from your help, what could they do?
The first point is to speak to family and friends. You know, it's sort of like, you've got to remember, everyone that's down the rabbit hole feels like they're secret to some sort of knowledge.
That's the appeal, isn't it? That's the intoxicant, is the idea that we're in the know and you're not. And I guess the more alienated and disenfranchised you feel, whether rightly or wrongly doesn't matter, if that is how you feel, then the idea, taps knows, the idea that you're in on something and everybody else isn't, I can see just how seductive that might be. Richard, thank you for what you do. I'd love to find out more. I respect your discretion on air, but I'd love to find out more off air, so do provide Ava with the deets. He's right though, isn't he? What else can you do? You've got this fella touring studios yesterday, refusing to apologise. You've got newspaper columnists and household name national broadcasters being cited by a bloke who's now dead as inspiration for his own COVID denial. And then some of them are even whining about having their freedom of speech compromised in newspapers read by millions of people. It'd be funny if it wasn't actually killing people. I mean, it's a fairly bleak conclusion to arrive at, just as is Richard's hit rate of about 3% when he dedicates enormous amounts of time with his fellow crusaders online trying to de-radicalise people. And that is the right word, isn't it? Gary Matthews is dead because he believed that coronavirus was either a hoax or being exaggerated, that masks were useless, and that people should ignore social distancing rules. You can't state with 100% certainty that that's why he's dead. But you can state with 100% certainty that if he was following that world view in the weeks prior to his death, for, a rough estimate, 3 or 4 of which he would have been infected, then he would have been infectious and he would have been endangering anybody he came into contact with, whether they were people who, like him, believed these mad lies that are being punted from almost every corner of the universe or not. And that's why it's just sad. And the only element of politics, perhaps, is the personal responsibility argument, the toxic claim that's been injected into our bloodstream by decades of secretly funded think tanks and billionaire-owned newspapers doing the business of billionaires while pretending to care about you and me. That is it. If something goes wrong, it's all your fault. We don't need tax money being spent on education or healthcare or anti-obesity measures or giving people money to lose weight. It's disgusting. And then within a blink of an eye, well, the only reason these people are dead is because they were overweight, so it's nothing to do with the government. What? How can you make both of those arguments? It's almost as blatantly hypocritical as having a huge problem with the police stopping people who might be in breach of coronavirus regulations, but being supremely enthusiastic about the police stopping usually young men of colour who may or may not be guilty of an unspecified and even unsuspected crime. So, you, sir, empty your pockets. You might have drugs in them. Excuse me, I'm white and I went to public school. Oh, as you were. Carry on. Terribly sorry. You, sir, stop there in the street. You're breaking coronavirus you Jobsworth copper. You'll be arresting me for having a picnic next. And oh, hang on, boss, there is a kid over there who's black. Oh, splendid. We'll go and stop and search him, and the tabloid newspapers will be cheering us to the rafters. Can you have double standards when you don't have any? It's a question for the ages. And can you have freedom of speech when it kills people? Nothing will change. Nothing will happen. The people who were cited by Gary Matthews will still be cashing their checks at the end of this month, and I don't know that there's any way to avoid it. And that, I get a bit over the top sometimes, but that genuinely breaks my heart. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Just so you know, I at the moment I cannot resist the urge to follow Nick Ferrari down a slightly shallow swimming lane, although I think you understand why. I don't know if you heard him talking about the case of the decapitated snowman on his programme this morning, but there was a real reminder of the fun that we can have together when we're not caught up in a global pandemic or in the continuing paroxysms of Brexit and other issues, or indeed the casualties of footballification of politics. So I'm going to ask you, if you didn't hear the story, can you work out how this...
Do you want to build a snowman?
...could possibly lead to this?
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
If not, stay tuned. If so, you're already in for a treat. Jackie's in Watford to steer us back to the deep end. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, I've had a couple of weeks of absolute... The virus has just hit me like a truck. My very, very best friend lives with her elderly parents at the moment, and I won't go into the circumstances of why she's ended up there.
Sure.
But we never really took it seriously. Everybody we knew that had it so mild because they were younger. She went to a party at Christmas, which obviously you're not supposed to do, and everybody at that party has since tested positive. So she went for a test. All she had was a hacking cough, but no other symptoms, just a bit of a cough. But she went for a test and it came up positive. So she obviously told her parents, and they went for a test and they were both positive. Her dad seems to have got away with it, really. But her mum, 2 days later, she was admitted to hospital and she died last week.
Oh, Jackie.
And my friend is just absolutely beside herself. It's just...
Does she...
Just
what's the word I want? Does she blame herself?
Well, she sort of knows that she... I mean, there is no doubt, because her parents were shielding, there is no doubt that...
So she went to essentially she went to an infection party and then brought the virus home, and now her mum is dead.
Yeah, and when you die, which I've learned, as I said, it's hit me like a truck, so I know all the details of it.
Yeah.
But when you die of COVID...
Be careful. Remember, there's people listening, there might be kids listening and stuff.
Yeah, but when you die of COVID, you can't see the person.
Right, yeah.
That's what I was going to say. And so her dad, who's been married to her mum for 60 years... The last time he saw his wife was getting into an ambulance at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the next thing he got 2 days later was a call at 7 in the morning to say she'd died. And so obviously he wanted to go up there to sort of see her. They weren't allowed to. They were only allowed to go up and pick up her jewellery. Also, he thought he'd see her and also he was still in his isolation period because he's positive as well. Well, when he came out of that, he thought he'd go and see her in the morgue. You're not allowed to.
Really?
Then he thought he'd see her at the Chapel of Rest. He's not allowed to because it's COVID. Even the coffin you choose has to be a certain thickness. It can't be the wicker one that we wanted for her. And so he's not been able to say goodbye, and obviously he's in the right state, and my friend is trying to look after him. But she has this horrendous, obviously, this guilt, and I don't know if she's ever going to get over it.
Do you know what? I don't know what to say. Oh, obviously, I don't know what to say. This is the example of the conversation that we've been having since 10 o'clock that really knocks all criticism or naysayers, if there are any out there, into space, doesn't it? But can I say to you, you're a brilliant friend to her, because I can hear the love in your voice and the concern for your friend, whereas an awful lot of people listening would want to give her a metaphorical slap, Jackie.
Well, I mean, me and her are really, really dear friends.
She's bloody lucky to have you in her life still.
Well, she was there from lots of things that happened to me in my life, which, if you know who I am, you know about it, because we've spoken before about what happened to me.
No, I know.
But it's just...
Where did she get the idea from that... Because you said we didn't take it that seriously, and I understand that, because you had it and it wasn't that bad, and you know, you don't do this for a living like I do, but you've got 103,000 people dead now, and was she just blasé and a bit silly, or was she believing the people who were telling her that there was nothing to worry about?
I think that when it first started, it seemed to be up north more, and then that the sort of London variant or Kent variant, as they're calling it, went mad, and then everybody we knew, everybody got it, but because you know, a lot of young people just not taking it seriously at all and going out and everything. Yeah. They all got it, but they all had it mild. So it's a case of it wasn't going to happen. You don't think it's going to happen to you, and even when she tested positive, she wanted to go and stay somewhere else. But, come and stay with me. Yeah. But it was too late by then.
Of course it was. She'd already brought it home. Because
by the time she got tested positive, she'd already heard about the other people at this same party that had tested
how many
positive.
How many were at the party?
Well, lots.
Really, about a full-on shindig, a full-on Christmas knees up.
Yeah, and
why didn't you go?
I just didn't. I'm not.
No, I just wondered. And did you tell?
I'm a teacher, and my students were dropping left, right, and centre with it. But again, having it really mild, and I'm a bit terrified of it myself, actually.
Yeah.
Because I think, out of the odds of all the people I knew that have got it, there's got to be one of us who cops it bad, and that might be me. So I just wasn't there.
Perfectly put. If I made you Empress of All You Survey, if I put you in charge, what would you do imagine if I was sitting here now on the radio and I don't know, cutting up a mask, or saying lockdowns don't work, or talking about how it's a hoax or it's a coronavirus, how would you punish me?
I think those people need to. I know it can't happen, but they need to visit a COVID ward, because around just after Christmas. I mean, she only died last week, and around this time now, they are putting beds in every corner they can find, and it's absolutely it's like a war zone up there. It's like a war zone.
Well, it's worse than that in a way, because it's like a war zone in there, and then outside you've got a significant number of people denying that there's any war taking place. Or in the case of Rachel Clark, the doctor who's my guest on Full Disclosure this week, when she describes what's happening in hospitals, some of the particularly pungent proponents of right-wing alleged journalism line up to attack her because she's not a fan of the government, so she can't be trusted when she describes what she sees at work. So at least when we're at war, everyone agrees we're at war, I think.
I'll tell you, they are doing their best, but one of the things they said when she first was admitted to hospital was that she was only 75, so that's not that old. That they wouldn't put her in. They wouldn't resuscitate her if she got any worse, and they wasn't going to put her on a ventilator because they didn't think it would help her. She had gone too bad.
It's the DNR, isn't it?
Yeah, but they did say that that they would if it come to that point, they would call people, but they didn't call until an hour after she'd actually died, and that's because they just. We couldn't get any news. Keep ringing the hospital. They were just so busy.
Well, the ratio of staff to patient has gone off the.
Well, we went up to get a jury, and we waited 15 minutes at the door, ringing the bell.
Yeah.
We weren't just banging at the door for 15 minutes, getting on their nerves. But we just had to wait for someone to come to the door, and we weren't. Including her dad, has not even been allowed to see her or anything. But it's just.
Well, they're overrun.
You just don't get the chance to say goodbye.
Humans have to make that decision. I don't want to betray any confidences, but I've spoken to one this week. Someone who has to make not Rachel on the Full Disclosure, but someone I know outside work, who has to make the decision on who gets the ventilator and who doesn't. And obviously people who would normally get one And it sounds to me, Jackie, as if your friend's mum falls into this category. They don't now get one because there are shortages. They're at a premium. They can't put someone on a ventilator who would have been put on a ventilator 2 years ago because the virus has used up so many of the and think of the toll of that job. I mean, who would want to do that? But someone has to in every hospital.
And do you know that people, when they're in the sort of throes of it, by the time you ring an ambulance, there's this thing where they get delirious. They have you heard of that? They get delirium. I mean, I didn't know any of this. I thought it was just...
Well, it's a tightrope to walk for journalists as well, because as I even cautioned you to be careful what you say on the radio a minute ago, because I was worried about who might be listening, and that means that some of the full effects that might help dilute some of the scepticism, I would need a better word, lies, nonsense, I don't know, you don't bring it to the party because you don't want to scare and spook people. Jackie, I'm so sorry for your loss as well as your friends, because clearly this isn't. You have no immunity from heartbreak. And I'll say again, I know she's seen you right over the years, but my goodness me, she's lucky to have you in her life. 90 minutes after 11, and there we have it. You know, the people who create the mindset that causes these deaths, still doing it. Still doing it. Don't get it. The contract signed between AstraZeneca and the European Commission has just been published. Ben Kentish is poring over the finer detail, a lot of it redacted, of course, some of the commercially sensitive stuff, so I don't expect to see any prices or numbers in there and other detail. But the fundamental question of who... Well, I think they both thought they were right, didn't they? That's why the world needs lawyers. But the fact that the European Commission, or it's been published, as far as I can tell, on the European Commission's website, on the European, they've published it, suggests that they must think that it proves their point, as opposed to the interview given to an Italian newspaper by the head of AstraZeneca earlier this week, which claimed a completely different point. It's just awful. I mean, it's absolutely awful. Even the Brexit relitigation involved in this is awful, although I don't think it's worth challenging. I think that, you know, you worry, as someone who recognises how ridiculous Brexit is going to be, you worry about the unleavened diet of proof. So just for the mental health of people who supported it, I think allowing them to sort of cling to the idea that this proves that leaving the European Union was a good idea is actually quite a generous thing to do. It's quite a helpful thing to do. Of course, you have to bring some facts to the party. For example, we were abiding by European Union legislation last year and rules when we put all of these contracts in place. There was absolutely no legal obstacle as a member of the European Union to doing what we've done. Having said that, that's a fact. My feeling is that had we not left technically, although not actually, then I don't know that we would have sailed this ship alone. So it's kind of 50-50. We could have done as members, so not being members anymore is not the reason why we were able to do this, but equally I don't know that we would have done. And Germany, as I understand it, has somewhat typically managed to kind of ride both horses by being leading advocate of the shared programme, which is going very badly at the moment, but also securing tens of millions of extra doses, which technically they were kind of not supposed to do, although there was no legal obstacle from preventing them from doing so. But that it's just awful. You know, unless you're a psychopath, you want as many people on this planet as possible to be vaccinated as quickly as possible. I'm not completely naive. You know, I'm looking at Keith and Ava right now, and if it was a choice between vaccinating them, who I'm occasionally fond of, I would, opposed to someone I have never met before of the same age and demographic and health, although you should give up smoking, I would, I'd obviously choose them, or at least I'd have to be persuaded that they should just join a queue along with lots of people I haven't met. Who would I want to get vaccinated first, my mum or your mum? Well, my mum, actually. And I can understand, I'm not completely stupid, I understand how that can be if the right demagogues and sort of vaguely racist commentators get their teeth into you. I can see how you can be persuaded to think that it's more important to vaccinate Brits than it is to vaccinate Germans, until someone points out that they're vaccinating someone who's woke. Oh, so hang on, here's a far-right is a member of the AfD. Who should get vaccinated first? Your fellow far-right German or your woke Brit? So you see what I mean about how silly this is once you scratch the surface of it. But the beauty of racist rhetoric is that you don't ever scratch the surface of it. You just give people the red meat and then pick their pockets while they're busy chomping on it. It always reminds me slightly of Jeremy Corbyn during Brexit. And I just mean that because the argument that I'd much rather be led by someone British, I'd much rather, and then you sort of think, really? I mean, Angela Merkel, wrongly perceived as being in charge of the European Union, is quite a right-wing politician. Would you really rather have Jeremy Corbyn in charge of your destiny than Angela Merkel if you hate everything that's even vaguely left-wing or so? Anyway, complicated and unnecessary. Because we're talking about freedom of speech versus freedom to die. And the fear I have that freedom of speech actually becomes freedom to kill people who believe you when you exercise your freedom of speech to say things that are either palpably untrue or very, very dangerous. Chris is in La Rochelle in France. Chris, what would you like to say? No? Okay, we'll see what we can do with that. Don't tell me the lines have gone down again. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. Ben's in Basingstoke. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I haven't spoken to you for a while. I've been working as a doctor during the first wave and again now, and also working on some of the research into the trials for COVID. And I think that it's such a sad story of the poor mum who got it off a daughter who'd gone to a party. And
I heard that. It's awful, isn't it?
It was terrible. Just awful. I mean...
Are you Ben who came into the studio? Or are you just Ben?
Yes.
Ben White.
Yeah.
You're Ben White.
Yeah, Ben.
Okay, It's good to hear your voice again, Ben. Thank you for everything. Thank you for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, working back on the wards again now. Yes. And it's really sad, and it's what we're seeing every day, James. And I think it's the staff on the wards. We generally just keeping our heads down and working. You know, that's in the main. But to see some of this disinformation, misinformation it's not only disheartening, but I think it's worse than that because there's no accountability for these people.
No.
And if you think about Andrew Wakefield, who caused palpable harm from his anti-vax stance, and now continues to cause even worse harm in America, but this is the sort of thing that these people, the prominent lockdown skeptics, whatever you want to call them, because they shift their names as their arguments shift. So you never really know. It's this sort of amorphous bunch of people.
No one's denying that the virus exists, but face masks are nappies, that kind of thing.
But it could be that, or they could be denying the virus exists. But what I'm saying is that there's this group, and obviously, as we've had, sadly, so many more deaths, and they fall apart a bit further. But at what point would they have any accountability for some of their actions? And that story which you just had, it's a direct link.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it is. And Facebook is so powerful. Social media is so powerful. We have been exposed to these. I'm
just going to cross to the newsroom, Ben, and then I'm going to come back to you immediately afterwards. So I know you're very busy. I can't really ask the newsreader to hurry up. That would be inappropriate. But I promise that we'll be back with you imminently. Dr. Ben White is in Basingstoke, Hampshire. Been working on the wards. We became pals during the junior doctors' controversy, I suppose, strike, call it what you will, and well, he's been proved right about that. So interesting to hear where he is today. Do you encounter so-called lockdown skeptics or COVID skeptics or whatever they're calling themselves this week? Do you encounter them on the wards, Ben? Because there is that appalling story this week, and 2 men have been arrested, so I'll limit what I say, in which people filmed themselves trying to take a man out of the critical care ward and to remove oxygen from the patient while doctors begged them to leave him alone. Did you come across scepticism on the actual wards?
Yeah, I watched that, actually. That was shocking. But I thought that the staff were very, very good in that situation. I thought the staff coped with it. I haven't really. Good. There's always the odd whisperings of stuff, but we don't really see too much of it on the ward and in the hospital, which is why the amount of it on social media is it's such a difference to the reality.
Yes. I don't get that, the gulf. I mean, a lot of people are referring me to more examples of Marjorie Taylor Greene in America, who's just ended up in Congress and who did indeed claim that the bushfires in California were caused by a Jewish laser that was fired from space. And we can still giggle at that, even what happened. And that's the gulf, isn't it? You're a doctor. It doesn't really make any sense to you in terms of quantity or quality, what is being punted as plausible online.
No. And I think your previous caller before saying about, exposing people to actually seeing firsthand what it looks like to be put on a ventilator or a breathing machine and turned on your back and on your front repeatedly just to try to keep you alive. But it shouldn't, it shouldn't have to take that to give somebody for somebody to believe that is what is really happening. And the problem, I think, is they feel like there's no repercussions for what they did or what they have done, or for some of them what they are still doing. Some of them have clearly faded away and they've deleted all their tweets and they're very quiet now. And people are disowning them right, right and centre. But there are others that, and is there no mechanism for holding these people accountable? Because they have, and I was saying, I think it's a kind of violence. It's not the kind of violence where somebody is doing something direct to lead to, but it is indirectly led to people coming into hospital and dying because they have believed what has been put about, screenshots of statistical tables which are nonsense, predictions that there's no second wave, these sorts of things. I'm not talking about mob rule. I'm not talking about people, but I'm talking about a kind of a justice and a kind of an accountability. As a researcher or as a doctor, I was very scared of saying something which might lead to harm directly throughout the whole pandemic, right? Yes. And whenever you speak to your friends and family and anything like that, why do these people not have any of that sort of? Why do they not have that? Why were they so confident?
I don't know.
Did they seem to know more than all of Sage, Independent Sage, and everyone else? Why?
I don't know.
And where's the accountability for these people? Because they have
I know the answer to that bit.
Caused death.
You as a doctor say that the people posting nonsense about there being no second wave, or nonsense about masks not being necessary, or nonsense about figures being manipulated and hospitals not being overrun, you state categorically they have caused deaths, but you couldn't prove it in a court of law. And there's your problem. There's the absence of accountability.
2 days ago, I was on the ward, and I had to call the wife and the son of a patient who I thought potentially was going to die in the next 12 hours. And I had to tell them that the way that things are at the moment, so full, we cannot allow you to immediately, that second, come in to see that person. Okay? This is happening all the time. People are dying on the wards because of coronavirus, and the reason I called the story touched me because they never got to see that person before they died.
You mean Jackie's story earlier?
Yeah,
Jackie's
exactly.
Story. Yes, I know.
It's tragic. That will live with these people for all of these lives, 100,000 lives. How many of those people, with these people taken away from them, they will never get to have those discussions. They will never see those people before they die. And honestly, it's all coming out now. I'm calling you, but this is. I've not called in or done anything during the coronavirus. We just get on with our jobs. But it's unbelievable that these people are not held to account.
There's another problem here, and I don't know if you'll thank me for pointing it out, but the fact that you were publicly associated with the industrial action against Jeremy Hunt when he was a health secretary means that if the far-right gossip sites or indeed a couple of Conservative backbenchers hear you saying this, their knee-jerk immediate responses, you can't trust him because he was a critic of the Conservative government 3 years ago.
I know, and I actually took him to court twice, actually. I know. So not just once, but and I mean, it's I mean,
do they, when they come to hospital, these people, do they insist on being treated by doctors who are supportive and impressed by Boris Johnson's performance as Prime Minister, or are they happy to be treated by doctors like you and Rachel who are profoundly unimpressed?
Well, I mean, I said it before. and I'll say it again, my politics or my political views or what I think of the government has absolutely no bearing on what I do as a doctor and the care that I would give people, and that should never do. And they should never, the two paths should never cross, and that's the way.
Well, I know that, and you know that, and I wonder whether they pretend not to know that, or whether they just think you're like them. And if they were doctors, they would treat people according to their political affiliations, according to their need.
I don't think people know what it's like, to be fair, and I understand why there would be concern about things like that. But you have to understand the 100,000 deaths, and actually I haven't directly criticised the government. I haven't said it was the scientific advice. I mean, I don't think I'm definitely not a fan of Boris Johnson, I'll tell you that. But there are certain things which the government's hands and the Public Health England's hands are tied on this. But what I'm saying is, these lockdown skeptics, these whatever you want to call them, they have to be held accountable for what they have been doing.
They can't be. Because you couldn't prove in a court of law that they were responsible for the death of Gary Matthews or Jackie's friend's mum or many of the people contacting me and many of the people that you may have treated. You can't prove it.
Well,
and I'm sorry, Ben, and I'm grateful for everything that you do. And I worry the same sort of people who have suddenly discovered concern for children who may be suffering as a result of being confined to barracks, of having to be homeschooled. They obviously spent 10 years not giving a fig about huge cuts to mental health provisions, but apparently now they really, really care. They never say anything about the mental health of doctors. And listening to you, it occurs to me that you and your colleagues, and a friend that I spoke to this week who is tasked with contributing to the decision-making process with regards to distribution of ventilators, this stuff must be weighing on your shoulders more heavily than the rest of us can even begin to imagine.
And it's not. So this is the other thing about the way that this lockdown argument is painted, is that doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals looking after people, we're in some way pro-lockdown in itself. Nobody wants to be in lockdown.
I know.
We're very fortunate. We have a job to go to, and I completely accept that. We get to go to work and do a job, and that is something which other people don't have. But we also have a time when we need our downtime and we need our time off. And our time off is also in lockdown.
Yes,
so it is,
and it's rubbish.
Worst option.
It's rubbish. Everyone knows it's rubbish, but everything else is worse.
Yeah.
Ben, look after yourself, mate. I mean that. It's a bit of a glib throwaway line, but I do worry that people are operating on fumes, I think, is the motoring analogy, and thank God you are, because you're our last line of defence, not just against the virus, but also against these ghouls and vampires who keep insisting that we should do less to keep the virus out of public circulation.
Well, stay safe
and
yourself,
you.
and
you do much more important work than I do. I think that is one of the least controversial things I've ever said on the radio, and you take care as well, and I look forward to raising a glass with you when this madness is over. All right, I'm not a lawyer. I hope that doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. And it's so regrettable, the fight between the European Commission and AstraZeneca, which we are inevitably, as the United Kingdom is inevitably caught up in, because the claim seems to be that they're contractually obliged to deliver 100 million doses to the United Kingdom above and beyond and before they are contractually required to keep their promises to the European Commission. Forgive me if I've got this wrong. There's no axe to grind here. I'm just interested in the facts. And so then that floats the weird business of the European Commission threatening to ban exports to third countries as a retaliation against the United Kingdom refusing, I think you could say, to export to the European Commission. So it looks a bit like he said, she said, although obviously the European Commission are in dire straits with regard to rollout, weeks more of delays expected, whereas we continue, Kate Bingham and her former colleagues, because she's not in that post anymore, her job was to set up what is now coming to fruition. They've clearly played an absolute blinder, according to the available facts. If the facts change, then we can change our minds, but I hope we don't. I really flipping hope we don't have to. So they've published the contract. Best reasonable efforts is the key phrase in it, but of course I don't think you'll be able to conclusively decide whether this contract favours AstraZeneca's position or the European Commission's position I did very cautious, all right, until you've seen the contract that AstraZeneca have with the United Kingdom. And so there's lots of redactions in it, but if you're expecting a VAR type result here, a VAR conclusion to say, right, that's 1-0 to AstraZeneca, or that's 1-0, it's over the line, the European Commission are in the clear and AstraZeneca are in breach of contract, well, there's a reason why you pay the lawyers the silly money, even more than Keith gets paid. There is a reason why. And I think, looking at early responses and indeed the absence of a VAR style, VAR for people not interested in football is like a camera-based system which goes back over a referee's decision and determines whether or not it's correct or not. And it is hugely controversial for a whole variety of reasons that we will not go into today. But I'm just looking at some of the early responses, and I think it might be the case that you're not going to get a definitive answer to it until we've seen the United Kingdom's contract. So Tony Connolly, who is one of the best chroniclers of such matters, has had a crack at it, and I'll share that with you shortly. What? Is Tony Connolly talking to us now? Right. No, we'll talk to Ben shortly. 8 minutes to 12 is the time, and Claire is in Beckton to steer us back to the freedom of speech conversation. Claire, thank you.
Hi, James.
Hello, Claire.
I'd just like to make a point that all of these COVID deniers spreading their misinformation, which in turn spreads the coronavirus, which in turn overwhelms the NHS, and it's not just COVID patients that then suffer. Because my mum died last week and there was no ambulance for her because the system was so overwhelmed.
And I don't know that the system would have been any more or less overwhelmed if it wasn't for these ghouls and vampires spreading misinformation. We'll never really be able to count. We know that Gary Matthews is probably dead because he believed this nonsense, and we know that he probably infected lots of other people while behaving in a way that endorsed the nonsense. But I don't want to intrude upon your grief. Do you think Mum could still have been alive if things had been handled differently, if things had gone differently on the specific issues that we're talking about today, not on the overall response of the government? Because that's, I think, a rhetorical question.
Well, I think we didn't know, but she had pancreatic cancer, right. And one of the effects of that is that it causes clots, and it caused a clot in her brain, and she suffered a stroke. So for the last week of her life, she was horrendously brain damaged. So we couldn't say goodbye to her properly because the hospitals,
she was in all sorts of bother, and the hospitals are sealed off effectively, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we didn't. We were actually allowed to see her in the end, but she couldn't speak. She was horrifically brain damaged.
So you're here.
I think that we were deprived of a chance to say goodbye to her properly because the hospitals were so overwhelmed, and because there's so many coronavirus patients. And I think that because these ghouls and vampires are encouraging people to take more risks.
Why do you think they do it? Do you have? You may not have given it any thought whatsoever, but I don't quite. I mean, look, you can get attention in all manner of ways. You know, I could streak around the studio with the cameras on, and there's all sorts of things you can do to garner attention. But what's the win here? If you say it's outrageous that I'm not allowed to preach against face masks, what's the win? What does success look like?
I think maybe because it's just such it's grabbing the zeitgeist, isn't it? This is the thing that everyone's talking about right now, so that's what's going to garner them the most attention right now, and that's all I can think, really.
So it is, and once you've done this thing to grab attention,
of their consequences.
Well, they won't.
I just want to think of their consequences.
103,000 people are dead already, and that's the ones who've died from COVID, not people like your mum who perhaps have died as a result of the hospitals being overrun by the results of some of the COVID conspiracies and some of the poor response to it. If they were going to pause, and actually Ben reminded us, some people have started deleting all of their previous comments, but plenty of them haven't. And they can't climb down.
I can see the difference in how hospitals are run, because my father also passed from cancer last year, and
you've had a time of it, haven't you?
We were allowed to be there at the end, and he did have the ambulance when he was rushed to hospital, and it was totally different for Mum.
Well, I mean, you know it is, because they're opening new wards, they're reallocating staff. I hope. Well, have you got someone looking after you, Claire?
I do, yeah.
Well,
I do.
That's something, isn't it? Because of course the other consequence of lockdown is that some people will be grieving in isolation in circumstances that you wouldn't wish on anybody. 11, Claire, take care. I do. Well, things will get better, but no one can pretend that they're going to get better anytime soon with those 2 losses weighing upon your mind, on your heart.